Thanks, Preston. What's up, guys? How are we doing tonight? Pretty good? Guys, it was a really, really big weekend. Everly was born. You saw the photo. Yeah. And Taylor Swift dropped an album. Yeah. Wow. We were a little more excited about Taylor Swift and babies. They're both really exciting. Just curious if there's any like monster listeners out there. Favorite song so far? Anybody? Okay, Bejeweled. Yeah. Anybody else? Any brave people? Well, cool. You can journal about it later, as you should with all Taylor Swift lyrics. I'm stoked to teach tonight. I've loved this series on the life you've always wanted. We've been through some really cool topics, and tonight I'm excited to teach not as your pastor, but as your reverend. I'm going to keep that alive as long as I can. So, like I have in previous times when I've preached, if I say something that really affects you, or maybe you feel like you just heard from God, you can say things like, amen, or yes, Reverend, keep preaching. Those things work great here. But tonight, we're going to continue our series on the life you've always wanted, and we're going to talk about the free life tonight. So if you have notes, you should have got a handout when you walked in. Take notes, write things down, circle things that stand out, and we'll have some questions at the end. So I'm sure you're probably curious, what is freedom? This is a term you're likely familiar with, but much like a kaleidoscope, the more you look into it, the harder it is to understand. Does it mean I can walk out in public butt naked and just be totally comfortable with myself? Is that freedom? Maybe it is to you. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe it's like going to a baseball game and seeing someone streak across the field and be like, that's freedom right there. And I'm after it. That guy's got it. Maybe to you, it seems like freedom, it means that I'm free from being anxious or released from comparison. That might feel a little bit closer to home. But I want to introduce you to 3 ways to be free. Here's the first. In order to be free, you must overcome other people. Aristotle says it like this: freedom is doing what man likes. And this makes sense to us. This type of freedom is what kids do when they pack a bag and leave the house to escape the authoritarian governing of their parents, only to realize when they get 100 yards away, they have no idea where they're going to get dinner. Anybody been there? Yeah, left home with a bag, went right back for dinner. Yeah, I've been there too. This is the type of freedom we sing about before every baseball game. Nations go to war to escape the oppression of tyranny. We light fireworks and watch Joey Chestnut crush 68 hot dogs. Yeah, every year to celebrate this type of freedom. Honestly, it's one of my favorite holidays at USA. In short, this type of freedom is getting to a place where nobody can tell you what you can and can't do. You might be familiar with that type of freedom. Here's another type of freedom, the second type. In order to be free, you must overcome yourself. This is a different type of freedom. This is from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. He taught this in Rome. Further, he says, people who subordinate reason to their feelings of the moment are actually slaves of their own desires and aversions. This is a different type of freedom. Said differently, people who give in to what they feel are actually slaves to themselves. And to be free is to have self-control over what you feel. This makes sense to us, whether you're good at it or not. We've all been in a place where we would like to have freedom over our own desires. The addict who looks at himself after years of addiction and wants some control. This one seems a little more noble, like a little more Christian, right? There's a problem with this philosophy of freedom, though. It's sort of like a logical circle. Let's say not giving into your desires means you begin avoiding your desires. Oh no, now my desire is to avoid desire. So avoiding my desires is actually giving in to that desire. Whoa. It's honestly a noble freedom. It's just insufficient. It runs you around in a circle. But both of these philosophies fall apart. To be free from others or to be free from self. And Jesus was concerned with our freedom. He has something to say about it. Just not these kinds of freedom. There's different moments in the Bible where you see Jesus interact with people who are seeking freedom. His disciples actually approach him and they say, are you at this time going to restore Israel to power? Deliver us from the Roman occupation. from the empire that's ruling over us, forcing us to obey them. Are you going to deliver us now? Is it time to be free, Jesus? Another moment with Jesus, the rich young ruler approaches him and says, aren't you going to help me become a better version of myself? What do I have to do to go from this 1.0 version of myself to this 2.0 version? And Jesus declined both times. Jesus was not primarily interested in these kinds of freedom. They're surface freedoms, but not deep freedom. In Colossians 1:13, this is going to be our text we're going to kind of come back to tonight. It describes the freedom that Jesus introduced and was primarily concerned with. So you have it on your printout if you want to read along with me. If you have your Bible, you're welcome to flip your pages or look at your phone. Colossians 1:13 says this: He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So Aristotle says, overcome the rule of others. Epictetus says, overcome the rule of your desires. And Jesus says, in order to be free, you must overcome the domain of darkness. Sounds kind of freaky, right? So let's break it down. What does that mean? Darkness in the Bible, this is the description of evil. Darkness is equal to evil. And the description is dark, the absence of light. And domain means an estate or a kingdom. A domain is a territory. This is kingdom language, not a physical rule, though a spiritual one. Now, if people heard this at this time, they must have heard this and gone, what? We're in the kingdom of Rome. What are you talking about? This is the most enlightened empire to date. This empire is wealthy, and some citizens put out lanterns at night and have wine and roads and schools. What are you talking about, Jesus? And much like the people of Rome hearing this, you too can live in a free domain, a free place, right? We live in America. Go USA. I hear your chants. You can achieve freedom from others and work on yourself to be free from you. But even then, according to the Bible, you are spiritually captive to the domain of darkness. Fun sermon so far, huh? It gets better. One of the most captivating stories in all of the Bible for me comes out of John chapter 8. And to paint the picture for you, the scene is chaos. Jesus is teaching outside the temple, and some religious leaders drag this woman in front of Jesus, and they put her there and said this woman has committed adultery. And she's there in all of her shame, surrounded by people. Religious leaders in the community have started to surround. And you can see the environment is intense as the religious leaders reach down to grab stones, because according to the law, they should stone this girl now. And they're trying to actually catch Jesus in sort of a trap, trying to make him say, yeah, let's kill her, right? And as they're gripping their stones and ready to take fire towards this woman, Jesus says something that's really fascinating. It says in the Bible that he actually reached down and started to draw in the sand, and we're not really sure what he actually did in the sand, but in this moment, he's right here with this woman. He's surrounded by religious leaders, and he says to them, he says, let him who has no sin throw the first stone. And if you're in this moment and you think you caught Jesus, the religious leaders think they have him trapped, and then they have to deal with themselves. It's kind of a weird moment, right? They have to think, okay, oh my gosh, I have sinned. I'm just like this woman. And if you can imagine the scene, the men drop their stones. And Jesus is still at the temple and he's teaching. And a few of them stick around to sort of see what he says. And he goes on, he keeps teaching, he says. This is in verse 12. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And I love this because in this moment, right after these men walk away and drop their stones, he looks down at the woman and they have a moment. So Jesus has a moment with these religious leaders. He's teaching, he's continuing to teach the people. And he says this to the woman. He says, has no one condemned you? He says, where are they? And then he looks at the woman and he says, neither do I condemn you. And I think that's one of my favorite moments in the whole Bible. I think we can all relate to that sort of longing for forgiveness. Another way to say this, Jesus is saying, follow me, and I will rescue you from the domain of darkness. He's saying that to both the woman caught in the sin of adultery and the religious leaders lost in the sin of self-righteousness. He's speaking to everyone in this circle. Now, we don't technically get a play-by-play follow-up after to see how the woman lived her life. Like, he says after this, he says, now go and sin no more. Do we know if she left this scene and stopped sinning? We don't know. Do we know if she was forgiven or not? We do know that Jesus looked at her and said, you're forgiven. Neither do I condemn you. And we can only imagine the depth of forgiveness she must have felt from Jesus, from going and being in this severe place of guilt, then to seeing all of these people leave and realize they're sinful too. Jesus levels the playing field and says, you're all sinful. And to grasp the free life, you have to understand two things. Here's the first thing we have to understand and grasp a free life. Number one, you enter the domain of darkness, the one that Jesus is talking about, when you sin. In verse 34 in the same passage, Jesus says, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. And in Romans 3:12, it says, there is none without sin, no, not one. So the second thing we have to grasp to live the free life, to understand the free life, is that in the domain of darkness, your identity is guilty. Our choices or our mistakes become our guilt, which becomes our identity. We wear it. We bear this identity deep down and try to escape it by doing a few things. Has anyone ever tried to escape guilt? Well, tell me if you can relate. But maybe we should do an activity to talk about escaping guilt. So this could get a little weird, but if you want to play along real quick, throw out, if you're willing to, throw out a few maybe words to describe sin or sins. Just throw out sins. You can just yell them back at me, and I'll take you through what people do with guilt in relationship to that sort of sin. So you can say anything that is sinful. Lying, okay. What else? You know, we'll go with that one. I'm sure all types of sin are popping into your mind. But there are three primary ways we try to escape sin, and I think that lying is a good example. We've all sort of been there. We've lied, and then we have to deal with it afterwards. And here's three ways we try to deal with sin. The first way is through distraction. We just try not to think about it. Like, you've lied, you have that moment with this person. I've literally had this moment with my wife before, and I've lied to her, and I'm like, just try to forget about it. It didn't happen. You didn't just lie to her. Oh my gosh, you did. Frick. And then usually she, figures out that I was lying. And she's like, seriously? The other thing we do is reinterpretation. Maybe we replay the events that happen, and we say, well, maybe it really isn't wrong. Maybe what I did wasn't totally wrong. Maybe it was good to lie in that moment. Maybe I should have lied because it protected that person from that thing. We try to do some reinterpretation. Maybe with guilt, we try a third thing, and this is so relatable, but it's doing good. Maybe you lie and you think, you know what? Maybe this week, if I just continue forward and do some really great things, maybe I try to serve my wife and do some really nice stuff for her and wash the dishes extra hard, then maybe I can escape the guilt that I feel from lying to her. Maybe you've had a moment with a friend or a family member or been in a situation you tried to do a little more good to escape it. Kind of balance out the karma, right? A recent study from Saybrook University in Pasadena concluded that upwards of 90% of adults live with regret. There is no guilt like the loom of eternal guilt, though. It'll drive a person mad. It'll cause a person to constantly look over their shoulder. There is a spiritual gap when it comes to eternal guilt. And if this is a spiritual gap, then there is no physical discipline. There is no mindset shift that can release us. Here's what I mean. If getting freedom from our guilt means, if freedom is external, then you need to go from being oppressed to being powerful. If we try to escape freedom and it's external, we need to go from being oppressed to being powerful. If freedom is internal, then you need to go from being lazy to being disciplined. I need to do the right things, if freedom is spiritual, if finding freedom is actually spiritual, then you need to go from being guilty to forgiven. And Jesus has the power to change the identity of the guilty by redeeming and forgiving us. The woman caught in adultery looks into the eyes of Jesus and he says, "Where are your condemners? Neither do I condemn you. You are forgiven." The creator of the world, wrapped in human flesh, comes into the world to do what? This is why he's here. This is it, to love and forgive, to rescue people who are lost back to himself. And this moment in John chapter 8 makes it so real for us. It's identity shifting. He does not look at the woman in this moment. Can you imagine? He doesn't look at the woman in this moment and say, "Hey, you're forgiven. Now, go work on yourself for a while, and when you're good enough, I will merit you with a new identity." That would have been a little odd. He doesn't say, "Hey, you're forgiven for this, but I know all the other things you did too, and I'm not quite sure you're really going to change." Man, that's kind of real for us, right? When Jesus forgives us, he wasn't doing it from a place of empty words. He does not give forgiveness like human forgiveness. He forgives us from a place of authority and full payment. It's totally different than what you would expect or what you receive from a person. This is the way that Jesus forgives, from authority and payment. What do I mean by that? Authority, he and only he has the power to forgive someone who has sinned against a holy God. And he is God and chooses to forgive from the place of Lord. And payment, when Jesus forgives, he forgives from a context of fully paid, nothing owed. He forgives through his death on a cross in your place. No one is going to come looking for you for a hidden fee. There's nothing missed there. Jesus fully forgives you from a place of full payment. It's done. If Jesus forgives you from a place of authority as Lord and fully paid through his death, this means you literally receive a new identity. This is incredible freedom. You are free. It's not that you feel free. When Jesus forgives you from a place of authority and full payment, this means you are free. You don't get to feel free for a moment. You claim a new identity as a free person. Forgiveness is our freedom. And forgiveness is so radical, it lifts the looming darkness of guilt. Sometime this past year, my wife and I, we have like these really great friends. We've been friends for a long time and interacted with both the husband and wife before when they weren't married. And they've known us all the way through and like sort of were with us as we started dating and got engaged and got married. They've been in our corner and in our life for a long time. And sometime during this past year, it came out that the husband of this couple was struggling with a sex addiction and actually had been with multiple other women within their marriage. And his wife found out about it. So he had to walk her through all the details of what he had done within their marriage. And if you could imagine, this, it was devastating, like absolutely devastating. And they invited us into their corner as we'd been kind of doing life together for a while. And we were devastated. Like, oh my gosh, I hate this. I hate this for both of them. They decided in the midst of this horrible situation that they were going to actually fight for their marriage and stay in it. The husband decided to go to a sex addiction recovery program, and the wife, she decided to join a group with other women who had gone through something like this with their husbands. And they're right in the thick of it. They're actually currently right in the thick of it. And recently, we've been sort of like with them from afar, walking through the madness of this situation. And recently, we got to have dinner with them and got to hang out with their new child. And it was a wonderful time. And as we're talking through this whole situation, as they're fighting for their marriage, you can imagine, like, in deep honesty, what it's really like to say yes and stay in it. We talked to the wife, and she's like, So every week goes by, and she's like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. This is terrible. It's so hard to forget the past. And for the husband, he's walking us through on his side. He's kind of been silent for most of the night, and the wife steps back to feed their child, and he's like, if I'm being honest, like, life is really hard right now. When they hang out with friends, often he gets uninvited or left behind, and he's noticed that all of his guy friends go and do things and don't invite him anymore. He's experiencing like the full weight of guilt and shame, and he says that every time they walk into a new person's home or another friend that they've known for a long time, he said, I have to replay all of my mistakes all over again because I know they're looking at me and know that about me now. So I have to relive it and replay it. And if anyone asks me a question about it, I have to relive my mistakes and my shame and all that. And as he's telling us this, Mal and I have made a commitment that we would never be shocked or surprised by sin. And we sort of stop him. We're like, hey, man, I don't know how you felt when you walked into, I don't know how you felt when you walked into our home, but we love you. And as I always can, I can literally feel like Mal start to cry next to me. And I think something happened in this moment because I think it only felt right to say also, we love you and we don't see you differently, but also we forgive you. And I can't explain this moment. You know, you try to walk through this moment with the woman who's pulled out of this moment of adultery and she's with Jesus. But to look face to face and see our friend and see his tears like start to roll down his cheeks. You can see that like literally with forgiveness in that moment, something happened. You could see in our home and in his life and in his marriage that as he reacted to our forgiveness, you could tell that his guilt was replaced with freedom between us and our relationship. You could see him wearing it, and it was amazing. And I tell you that story because I think it's important that you take that and then go here with me. Imagine that moment. That's really close to home because I experienced it. And you know the story about Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. But imagine this. Imagine it's you and everything that you've done. All of your guilt, weight, and shame, all of your sin. Let's say it can just be read by anyone. You're wearing it on you, right? We're humans. We actually hide our mistakes under our skin. So it's not like that. But just imagine that people could like walk up to you and they could read like everything that you've done, all the mistakes that you've made. How shameful that would be. You walk through this life. Just imagine a day and knowing that people had observed you all day long and they're reading about the mistakes that you have made. And then finally you get to a place and you sit down and across the table it's Jesus. He's there and he can see all the mistakes and shame that you've walked through. And he looks at you and as you guys are talking, he's like, you have borne the looks in the eyes of so many people who see what you've done. And he looks at you and he says, I love you. I know all of this about you. I love you. And I forgive you. Now that sort of forgiveness that happens from a holy God wrapped in human flesh from Jesus, you might actually feel quite emotional in that moment to feel released from sin and shame, but there's something that happens in that moment that's totally different. There is a release that's not just a physical release where tears roll down your face. Maybe that does happen, but what happens in that moment with you is a transfer from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of light. In that moment, all at once, all of your sin and shame turns into freedom. With forgiveness turns into freedom. You have a new identity. And imagine this. imagine that all those things that are written on you, like they actually start to disappear when you get up and walk away from the table. And imagine that your shirt changes, what you're wearing changes, and it just says free. And you do the same lap, and you walk past the same people. You do the same route, and people see you totally different. And they get to know that guy or that girl who I read all of those things about, those awful things. They're a different person. They're free. You see, I say that because when you go from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of light, you're called a son or daughter. It's an adoption moment. Like you literally, everything changes. You have full access to an eternal God, and you're his. That's what freedom's actually like. It's an identity shift. You go from being guilty to being free. And Jesus says it like this. He says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. There's a total shift. It changes everything about you. Galatians 5 says, for freedom, Christ has set us free. So our hope for you is that you would take on this identity. You would actually take this seriously. You would take on this identity and live the free life. It would propel you to live the life you've always wanted. And I think to live the life you've always wanted, it starts with becoming free. You would be free to live like Preston taught, the guided life, where you release control and trust the Holy Spirit to lead you through this life. That you would live a secure life where the gospel is your secure foundation, built on what Jesus has done for you, not what you have done. That you would live a communal life where you embrace what Jesus has done for you and extend the same kind of love to even your worst enemies. You would live the rested life where you believe that Jesus has done all the work and released your life from all the checklist, and relax and celebrate and trust in him. And lastly, the joy-filled life, that you would step into the joy-filled life, which we'll learn about next week from Preston as he wraps up the series. And I want to pray for us as we finish. I want to pray this, if you'd pray with me. I want us to pray that we would receive the forgiveness that sets us free and live as free people. And then we have a few questions after to respond to with your neighbor. God, we thank you so much that you love us, that you see us as we are, God, and you choose to take us as your sons and daughters. God, I pray that you would help us to actually be in a place where we can imagine and receive all the love that you have to give, God. God, I pray that for those of us in this room, God, that you would become more real than anything else. God, the things that actually control the domain of our brains. God, the insecurities, the comparison, the looming guilt. God, I pray for moments with you, Jesus, where we would actually let you into those places, God, and we ask for forgiveness. We ask for freedom, God, that this room would be a free room. God, I pray that the freeness, God, that we experience in a new identity as we walk back onto this campus and in this city, into our jobs, God, that people would see us and see that we're free, and they'd want the same things, God. That they would want the same free life that they're longing for and can't put language to. We thank you that we know the language to freedom, and it's Jesus. So we love you so much, Jesus. And we pray as we answer these questions, God, that we'd want more of you, God. That there'd be honesty in this room and transparency. So we love you and praise in your name. Amen. So I have a really simple question sort of on the screen that I want to ask about the first couple of ways that we relate to freedom. So as you read those, maybe talk to one or two people next to you and tell them which one you relate to more.